Welcome back to Bookish Mind, Season 2. In today's episode, we explore Chapter 12 of Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, titled The Subconscious Mind Connecting to Infinite Intelligence. Hill reveals that your subconscious is not just a mental storehouse, it's the bridge between your desires and the boundless power of infinite intelligence.
And that title really sets the stage, doesn't it? We're diving deep into this one chapter today.
Yep, just Chapter 12. We're going to really unpack Napoleon Hill's ideas here, which can be, well, pretty profound, sometimes challenging too.
Definitely challenging. He pushes the boundaries of, let's say, conventional thinking about the mind.
So our mission for you listening is to walk through Hill's view of the subconscious. We'll look at how he defines it, what he says it does,
That's function.
how it gets influenced, and this really big idea he has about it being a connecting link.
The direct link to what he calls infinite intelligence. That's the core concept, really.
And we're sticking just to the source excerpts from this specific chapter of Think and Grow Rich.
Right. It's all about understanding this part of your mind, as Hill saw it, and crucially, how you might learn to influence it.
Influence it to, well, turn your big desires into actual reality. That's the promise, isn't it?
That's the promise laid out in the book, yes. How to use this faculty intentionally.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Hill's basic definition, he calls the subconscious mind a field of consciousness.
Yeah, field of consciousness. Think of it as the destination point for every single thought, every impression that comes through your conscious mind.
Everything from the five senses.
Exactly. Everything you see, hear, touch, taste, smell. And also, importantly, the thoughts you generate inside your head. It all gets sent there.
Sent to this field. And he says it gets, what, classified and recorded?
Classified and recorded. He uses this analogy, which I think is quite helpful, like a filing cabinet.
A mental filing cabinet.
Sort of, where all these thoughts and sense impressions get filed away. And the idea is you can, recall them or withdraw them later, like pulling a file.
Okay, that makes sense as a storage concept. A repository for everything experienced or thought.
Here's the first really big kicker. The crucial point Hill makes right away.
Which is?
This filing cabinet.
Yeah.
This subconscious mind. It's completely non-discriminatory.
Non-discriminatory, meaning it just takes whatever you give it.
Precisely. It receives and files any sense impression, any thought impulse, and it doesn't care about the nature of it. Good, bad, positive, negative, helpful, harmful.
It doesn't judge.
No judgment, no filter. If your
Right.
conscious mind experiences it or thinks it, boom, it gets filed.
Okay, wow. Why is that so incredibly important then? What's the implication for us?
Well, think about it. It immediately shifts the focus, doesn't it? It's not just about passive thinking anymore. It highlights the absolute need for, let's call it conscious mental management.
Because if it takes everything,
Then the quality of what you let into your conscious mind becomes paramount. If you're constantly dwelling on fear, lack, doubt, negative news, complaining,
that's what gets filed.
that's exactly what gets filed away. And it's not just stored like dead data. Hill implies these filed thoughts are like potential instructions ready to be acted upon.
So it's not just storing information, it's storing directives, almost.
Yeah.
That really changes things.
It really does. It means you have to be much more mindful of the thoughts and, crucially, the feelings you allow to occupy your conscious attention. They're being cataloged, potentially to shape your actions and reality later.
Okay, so it takes everything passively. But you mentioned potential power.
Right, because there's a flip side to this non-discriminatory nature. While it accepts all the passive stuff, Hill is very clear. You can voluntarily plant specific things.
Like specific thoughts, plans, goals.
Exactly. Specific plans, desires, purposes. You can intentionally send messages to this filing cabinet. It's not just an inbox for random mental noise.
So you can take an active role.
Yes, this is the core of how you intentionally influence it. But, and this is a really big but,
There's always a catch.
there's a condition. For this voluntary planting to actually work, to be effective, it needs more than just, thinking about it or writing it down.
It needs something else.
It must be mixed with emotional feeling, strong emotion. And the emotion he highlights again and again as the most vital, the most powerful for this, is faith.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
This links directly back to the earlier principles in the book, right?
Mm.
Desire, faith, autosuggestion.
Absolutely. You can see this chapter as explaining the machinery behind why those earlier principles are supposedly so important. He's saying the subconscious acts first and most readily on your dominant desires,
The ones you really, really want.
if they've been mixed with strong emotional feeling, especially faith. This is why he stresses cultivating that unwavering faith in your desire. It's like the fuel.
The fuel that ignites the subconscious engine, you could say.
That's a good way to put it. So just thinking, I want this, isn't enough. Even writing it down, while important for clarity, isn't the whole story. You have to inject it with that powerful emotional charge.
Particularly faith. For the subconscious to recognize it as a priority, a command to act on.
Exactly. Without that emotional intensity, the thought might just sit there. Another file in the cabinet, but not an active instruction.
Okay, so it's a storage system, but it's also more than that. You called it an engine earlier. Let's get into that operational side.
Yes, it's definitely presented as more than just storage. Hill says the subconscious mind works continuously, 24/7, day and night.
It's always on.
Always on, always processing whatever input it gets, whether that's just the random thoughts drifting through your head or those specific, intentional, emotionally charged directives we just talked about.
And this engine, this constantly working part of our mind, Hill says it draws power from somewhere else.
This is where we step into the really big, perhaps controversial concept. He claims it draws upon the forces of infinite intelligence.
Infinite intelligence, that sounds vast. What does he mean by that, practically speaking, within his system?
Well, he doesn't fully define it in, say, theological terms. It's presented as this boundless source of power, wisdom, creativity, a universal consciousness, perhaps.
Yeah.
The key point for Hill's system isn't necessarily what it is, but that your subconscious mind acts as the bridge to it.
The bridge between our normal, finite mind and this infinite source.
Precisely. And the purpose of this connection, according to Hill, is that the power drawn from infinite intelligence via your subconscious is used specifically to transmute your desires into their physical equivalent.
Transmute, like change form. Turn the thought desire into a real thing.
Yes, exactly. Change the non-physical desire into its physical counterpart. But he adds an important detail about how it does this, which is it always uses the most practical media available to achieve this.
Most practical media. Okay, let's unpack that. What does that suggest?
Yeah.
It's not just poof, and the thing appears.
Probably not, no. Practical media suggests it works through the existing structures and possibilities of the physical world. It might mean influencing your intuition, making you notice an opportunity you'd otherwise miss.
Or maybe attracting the right people or circumstances, guiding your actions.
Exactly. It leverages what's practical, what's available in your reality. It works through natural channels, through cause and effect in the physical world, guided by the blueprint of your desire. It's not necessarily supernatural intervention, but more like optimized navigation through reality.
That makes it feel a bit more grounded, in a way. It's using the world around you, not bypassing it.
Right. It positions the subconscious, connected to this infinite intelligence, as a powerful force that intelligently navigates and influences the physical world to manifest your goal based on the emotionalized instructions you provide.
And Hill seems pretty awestruck by this whole idea himself, doesn't he?
He really does. He uses words like stupendous and imponderable to describe the potential creative power connected with the subconscious. There's a real sense of awe there.
And he even admits his own limitations, saying our knowledge is pitifully limited.
Yeah, I find that quite striking. He says contemplating it makes him feel a sense of littleness and inferiority. Even the guy writing the book felt overwhelmed by the sheer scale of what he was describing.
It really emphasizes that he's not presenting this as just some simple mind trick.
No, it's positioned as something deeply profound, almost reality-altering. He comes back to that connecting link idea, the thought that this part of your mind is the communication channel between your everyday thinking and this vast, infinite intelligence. He says that thought alone almost paralyzes one's reason.
Almost paralyzes one's reason.
Yeah.
That's strong language. It conveys how huge and perhaps unbelievable this concept felt even to him. It's not just about psychology, it's bordering on metaphysics.
Absolutely. And he argues that once you start to really grapple with this concept, even if you don't fully understand the how, but you accept the potential, then the other instructions in the book start to make more sense.
Exactly. You begin to understand why certain things are emphasized so heavily, like making your desires absolutely crystal clear, reducing them to writing. It's not just a self-help exercise then. It's about giving the subconscious a clear target.
Precisely. If the desire is vague or fuzzy, what blueprint is the subconscious supposed to follow when it's drawing on infinite intelligence? Clarity provides the coordinates, the precise pattern.
And this also explains the insistence on persistence, doesn't it?
Totally. Why you have to keep holding that desire, keep applying the principles. It's not just about trying hard. It's about consistently feeding that clear, emotionally charged desire into the subconscious.
It's like engraving the pattern deeper and deeper.
You could think of it that way. Persistence is the consistent, focused input needed to make that desire the dominant influence, overriding other random or negative thoughts. Hill says the 13 principles themselves, desire, faith, etc., are the stimuli.
The tools you use to get access.
The stimuli you use to acquire the ability to reach and influence your subconscious mind. They are the methods.
But he warns against getting discouraged if it doesn't work right away.
Yeah, definitely. Don't expect miracles on the first try. Gaining voluntary control, influencing this deep part of the mind, it takes practice.
Because it can only be directed through habit.
That's what he says. Guided by the instructions, like those for faith and autosuggestion. You're essentially building a powerful new mental habit, the habit of consciously directing your subconscious. And habits take time, patience, and persistence to form.
Now, this is crucial. What happens if you don't actively try to influence it? If you just let it run on autopilot?
Right, because Hill reminds us it is running voluntarily all the time, whether you're paying attention or not.
And if you're not actively planting positive desires?
Then it feeds on whatever is reaching it, which, because of its non-discriminatory nature, means it feeds on the thoughts that reach it due to your neglect, basically.
Your lack of conscious direction.
Exactly. And for many people, that means it's feeding on and processing thoughts of fear, worry, doubt, lack, limitation, all the negative stuff that's often floating around in our minds or in the environment.
So those negative thoughts also act as stimuli, just like the positive ones.
Yes, they become the unintentional instructions, the default programming, unless you consciously take control, master those impulses, and deliberately feed it the positive desires you actually want to manifest.
And he mentions thought impulses are constantly reaching it anyway from all sorts of sources.
Yeah, that's another layer, suggesting it's like a receiver, possibly picking up things beyond just your own conscious thoughts, which makes the need for conscious, positive direction even more critical.
So the real goal here is twofold. You're trying to actively plant the positive.
And at the same time, you're trying to kind of build a filter, help shut off the flow of those negative impulses.
To make sure the subconscious is working from the blueprint you choose, the positive desires.
Right, and when you achieve that level of control, that's when Hill says you gain the key which unlocks the door to your subconscious mind.
And you control that door so well that no undesirable thought can get in and influence things.
Wow, that sounds like a very high level of mental mastery. It absolutely is. It's depicted as the ultimate goal, complete command over your inner environment, ensuring only your chosen, positive, faith-filled thoughts serve as the operating instructions for the subconscious and its connection to infinite intelligence.
It's not about never having a negative thought again, perhaps, but ensuring they don't dominate or hijack the process.
That seems to be the implication. Dominance is key. What holds sway in your mind most consistently?
Okay, this ties into another vital partnership Hill talks about: imagination and emotion. He starts by saying everything man creates begins as a thought impulse.
Yes, that fundamental idea again. Thought is the origin point. You can't build a chair, write a book, start a company, nothing, without first conceiving it in thought.
Thought is the seed. So what helps that seed develop into something more concrete, like a plan?
Imagination. He says through the aid of the imagination, those initial thought impulses can be assembled, combined, shaped into definite plans.
But another caveat.
Always. Imagination needs to be under control. Controlled imagination creates constructive plans leading to success. Uncontrolled imagination, well, that often runs wild with worry, fear, worst-case scenarios, feeding the very negativity you want to avoid.
So controlled imagination builds useful plans. How does this link back to planting thoughts in the subconscious?
Hill makes a very specific, very important claim here. He says all thought impulses that you intend for transmutation, the ones you voluntarily plant, they must pass through the imagination.
Must. There's no other route for intentional planting.
According to Hill's model here, no. Imagination is the gateway for voluntary input. And remember that other crucial ingredient.
Faith, the emotion.
Exactly. The thought must also be mixed with faith. And here's the really critical connection he makes. The only way this mixing of faith with your definite plan or purpose happens, specifically for voluntary submission to the subconscious, is through the imagination.
Whoa. Okay, hold on. So imagination isn't just where you dream up the plan. It's also where you infuse that plan with faith before sending it down to the subconscious.
That's precisely how he presents it. Imagination is like the processing station. It shapes the plan and blends in the essential emotional fuel, the faith, making it ready for the subconscious to receive and act upon.
So voluntary use of the subconscious requires all these pieces working together: desire, faith, imagination, persistence.
Yes, he explicitly says it calls for the coordination and application of all the principles. They're interconnected parts of a single system, with imagination playing this crucial role in preparing the input.
This really elevates the role of imagination beyond just daydreaming.
Absolutely. It becomes a vital faculty for consciously directing this whole process. And this is where he brings in that poem by Ella Wheeler Wilcox.
Thoughts are things.
Yes, that famous verse. You never can tell what a thought will do in bringing you hate or love, for thoughts are things and their airy wings are swifter than carrier doves. It beautifully captures the unseen power of thought.
They follow the law of the universe. Each thing creates its kind, and they speed or the track to bring you back whatever went out from your mind. How does Lee use this?
He interprets it to mean that thoughts going out from your mind don't just, float away. They also embed themselves deeply in your subconscious.
Okay, so they land internally too.
And once embedded, especially those consciously planted and emotionally charged ones, they act like a magnet or a pattern or a blueprint.
Guiding the subconscious in its work.
Exactly. As the subconscious draws on infinite intelligence to transmute the thought into physical reality, it's using that embedded thought pattern as its guide. It attracts like a magnet, follows the pattern, builds according to the blueprint. This, Hill says, is why thoughts truly are things, because every material thing originates as thought energy.
That's a powerful concept. Your dominant thoughts are literally forming the inner template for your outer reality.
That's the core idea. Which brings us back, again, to the critical role of emotion. Because the subconscious isn't just influenced by any thought.
Right, it's more susceptible to thoughts mixed with feeling or emotion.
Much more susceptible than to thoughts based purely on logic or reason. In fact, Hill makes a really bold claim here.
What's that?
He says there's much evidence to support the theory that only emotionalized thoughts have any action influence upon the subconscious mind.
Only emotionalized thoughts. So, cold, purely rational ideas don't actually trigger the subconscious to act.
That's the assertion. They might get filed, maybe, but they don't become active directives for transmutation. It's the feeling, the emotion attached, that gives the thought its power within this system.
And I guess observationally, we know emotion drives a lot of human behavior anyway, maybe more than pure reason does for most people.
It's a well-known fact, as he says, that emotion or feeling rules the majority. So if the subconscious responds best to emotion, then understanding and using the right emotions becomes absolutely essential if you want to direct it purposefully.
He uses that analogy of yeast in bread for emotions, right?
Yeah, that's a great one. Yeast transforms the dough, makes it active, makes it rise. Emotions, he says, are the accretion element. They transform thoughts from passive ideas into active states.
From inert to alive, basically.
Exactly. That's why emotionalized thoughts get acted upon more readily than ideas coming just from cold reason. They have the activating ingredient.
So for you listening, if you're aiming for a specific goal, say financial success, it's not enough to just think about money. You have to inject that thought with strong, positive feeling.
You have to speak the language the subconscious understands. You're preparing to influence your inner audience, as Hill puts it.
And to hand over your desire, your blueprint, you must use its language of emotion.
Which leads him to list the key emotions you need to work with. First, the 7 major positive emotions.
Let's hear them.
Desire, faith, love, sex. The emotion of, he clarifies, enthusiasm, romance, and hope.
Okay, those are the big positive drivers.
He says there are others, but these are the heavy hitters, the most powerful ones used in constructive, creative effort, and the way to master them.
Let me guess. Practice.
Only by use. You have to actively cultivate these feelings, apply them consciously, link them to your goals and thoughts.
And this ties right back into the book's goal, developing money consciousness. You do that by filling your mind with these positive emotions.
You can't get there, he insists, by dwelling on the negatives. Which brings us to the other list.
The 7 major negative emotions to avoid.
Yes. These are fear, jealousy, hatred, revenge, greed, superstition, and anger.
Those are definitely destructive forces.
And Hill presents them as direct obstacles to constructively influencing your subconscious. And here's a fundamental rule he lays down, very black and white.
What's the rule?
Positive and negative emotions cannot occupy the mind at the same time. One must dominate. They're mutually exclusive in the moment.
Like light and dark. One pushes the other out.
Exactly. It's presented as an internal battlefield, and the responsibility for who wins.
It's on you. It's your responsibility, he says, to make sure the positives are the dominating influence. You choose the winner.
Consciously. You have to deliberately cultivate the positives until they outweigh and push out the negatives.
How do you do that consistently? It sounds exhausting.
Well, he says the law of habit comes to your aid here. The instruction is simple, but the application requires discipline.
Form the habit of using the positive emotions.
Form the habit of applying and using the positive emotions constantly, especially in relation to your main desire. Practice feeling enthusiasm, faith, hope about your goal.
And eventually the idea is those positive habits become so strong
That they dominate your mind completely, and the negatives just can't find space to get in or take root. That's the state of mastery.
But he's really strict about this, isn't he? About following the instructions.
Incredibly strict. He says you have to follow them literally and continuously to gain control. And then comes the really harsh part.
The part about a single negative thought.
Yes. He claims the presence of even one single negative emotion, if it's the dominant one in your conscious mind at a given time, is sufficient to destroy all chances of constructive aid from your subconscious for your positive goals.
Wow, that's intense. One dominant negative cancels out the positive effort.
That's the stark warning. It implies you need constant vigilance over your emotional state. It's not enough to be positive most of the time. That dominant negativity, even if temporary, can apparently derail the whole process, according to this model. It really underscores the need for consistent mental discipline.
This whole idea of the subconscious being this powerful emotion-driven link. It also connects to how Hill talks about prayer, doesn't it?
Yes, he tackles prayer directly in this chapter, and he's quite critical of how most people approach it.
What's his main criticism?
He observes that most people only turn to prayer after everything else has failed, as a last resort.
So they're coming from a place of desperation, defeat.
Exactly. Or they just rattle off memorized words, meaningless words, he calls them, without any real feeling or belief behind them. And because they're praying from that state of failure and desperation.
Their minds are filled with fear and doubt.
Precisely. Fear and doubt are the dominant emotions. And according to his model, what does the subconscious do with dominant emotions?
It acts on them.
Yeah.
And passes them on to infinite intelligence.
Exactly. So infinite intelligence receives and acts upon the fear and the doubt, not the words of the request.
So if you're praying for something, but you're consumed by the fear, you won't get it.
Your prayer, Hill concludes bluntly, will have been in vain. The underlying negative emotion overrides the positive intention expressed in words.
That's a really challenging perspective on prayer.
It is. He suggests you test this yourself. If you feel a prayer was answered, try to recall your actual state of mind during that prayer. He bets you'll find it was a state dominated by faith and belief, not fear.
So the feeling is the prayer, in a sense.
The feeling is the active component that gets transmitted, yes. And interestingly, he then offers this almost prophetic vision about prayer's future.
He thinks it will become a science.
Yeah, he predicts a time when the science of prayer will be taught, when its principles will be understood and applied effectively, just like any other science.
When would that happen?
When mankind is ready for it, demands it, and sheds the ignorance, superstition, and false teachings that he believes currently surround it.
And in that future, people wouldn't approach infinite intelligence or the universal mind, as he also calls it, with fear.
No, because fear would be largely conquered through understanding these principles. People would understand their connection, their status as, in his words, a child of infinite intelligence. He believes some people have already reached that state.
And he uses examples from science to support the possibility of harnessing unseen forces through faith and understanding.
Right. He points to lightning. Once feared as divine wrath, now understood and harnessed as electricity through faith in observation, inquiry, principles.
Applying knowledge overcame the fear and unlocked the power.
And the space between planets. Once thought empty and void, now known to be filled with energy, high vibrations. He talks about energy connecting human brains.
And then asks, well, if energy connects brain to brain, why wouldn't it also connect brain to infinite intelligence?
It's presented as a logical extension within his framework of universal energy and connection. And he's very clear about the requirements for making this connection work, whether through prayer or focused desire.
No toll gates, he says. Not about money or status.
Nope. Costs nothing in material terms. But it does require those internal qualities: patience, faith, persistence, understanding, and a truly sincere desire to connect.
And crucially, the approach must be made by the individual. Directly.
Only by the individual himself. This is why he dismisses paid prayers or relying on intermediaries. Infinite intelligence, in his model, doesn't do business by proxy. You connect directly or you don't connect effectively for this purpose.
Which also means just reciting prayers from a book doesn't work.
Useless, he says, because the thoughts, the desires, they have to be transformed through your own subconscious mind. They need your personal feeling, your faith, your specific intention processed internally.
And this is where he uses the radio analogy again, specifically for prayer.
It's a powerful analogy for vibrational transformation. A radio station takes sound, a low vibration, and steps it up to a much higher frequency to travel through the ether.
Way beyond what we can hear.
Right. Then the radio receiver steps it back down into audible sound. Hill suggests the subconscious acts as the intermediary, the transmitter-receiver, in prayer.
How so?
It takes your heartfelt, emotionally charged prayer or desire, translates it, steps it up into terms or vibrations. Infinite intelligence recognizes, sends the message.
And then brings back the answer.
Yes, brings back the answer often as a definite plan or idea flashing into your conscious mind, showing you how to achieve the goal.
Which explains why just reading words fails. No personal transformation, no stepping up of the vibration through your own subconscious.
Exactly. And he labels it clearly as his theory that before reaching infinite intelligence, the thought prayer is likely transformed into a spiritual vibration.
And the only thing that gives thoughts that spiritual quality, that higher vibration.
F.A. It always comes back to faith. It's presented as the essential transformer, the energy that elevates thought to the spiritual level required for connection.
And his final word on this section is that stark contrast, faith and fear.
Make poor bedfellows. Where one is found, the other cannot exist. A final reminder. If you want faith to dominate, fear must be actively overcome and excluded, especially when trying to connect with this deeper power.
Okay, let's try to wrap our heads around all of this. We've covered a lot. The subconscious as this non-judgmental filing cabinet and powerful engine.
Drawing on infinite intelligence, acting as the bridge for transmuting desires.
The intermediary in prayer, the crucial link between your inner world of thought and feeling and your outer reality.
And the keys to influencing it, according to Hill. Voluntary planting with absolute clarity, unwavering persistence, mastering all the principles like faith and imagination.
And, maybe above all, mastering your emotions. Cultivating the positive, eliminating the negative.
Right. That emotional mastery seems paramount.
So for you, listening, someone interested in Think and Grow Rich, this chapter isn't just interesting psychology. It's presented as the how. The mechanism behind turning desires, especially for wealth, into reality.
It suggests the power isn't primarily out there in circumstances, but in here, in your ability to command your own mind, your own feelings, and direct this subconscious faculty using the rules Hill lays out.
Rules like the absolute need for dominant positive emotion mixed with faith and imagination, and that strict avoidance of dominant negativity. It's about becoming, you could say, the architect of your inner world.
Believing that inner world directly shapes the outer results you experience.
Which leads us to a final thought for you to mull over, drawing directly from Hill's ideas here. If everything we create truly begins as a thought impulse, and if thoughts mixed with dominant emotion, processed through imagination and faith, are the very language your subconscious uses to connect with infinite intelligence and actively reshape your reality.
Then what level of responsibility does that place on you, moment by moment? How vigilant do you need to be about the thoughts and feelings you allow to dominate your mind, knowing they might be the actual blueprint for what shows up in your life?
And how does that incredibly strict rule that even one dominant negative emotion can supposedly block constructive help, how does that change your perspective on the daily effort needed to genuinely cultivate and maintain a positive mental and emotional state? It's quite something to think about.